Well, if I may, I'd like to welcome Peter Cochrane here. Thank you very much, and apologies for having kept you kicking your heels outside, but we had a vote, and that got in the way of the timetable of the previous bit, so thank you very much.
Pleasure.
We have got in front of us a brief CV of your background, so which you've helped us with providing that, so thank you. The meeting is going to be broadcast, so I hope that's not going to pose any problems to you.
Not a problem.
So when you start, you just briefly, for the benefit of all those people who are listening, just tell us who you are.
Okay.
And then if you would like to make a brief opening statement, please feel free to do so. And what I'd like to do, with your consent, is to aim to go on for about an hour, assuming that's
sure.
Yes,
Yes,
that's
no,
okay.
no problem at all.
Yeah, good, thank you. Right, so would you like to identify yourself and then make an opening statement if you want to?
Sure.
Please.
Well, pleasure to be here. I'm rather pleased you've invited me. I've been working in this area for a long, long time. My name is Peter Cochrane. I have 2 doctorates in technology and also a visiting professor in the UK. I've spent all my life, from being a young man, in telecommunications, IT. To give you a perspective, I was at one point a lineman as a young man, so I used to climb holes and dig holes. But I went into research and development and became head of research in BT and ultimately CTO of the company. In 1979, my PhD was instrumental in BT making the decision to go fibre everywhere. In 1986, I had got fibre to the home cheaper than copper at 2 megabits. My company, and I left BT in 2000, my company now is a consultancy. I travel the world continuously. So the evidence I'm going to give this afternoon is not based on the UK or Europe, it's a global perspective. But to just give you a rather interesting view, we completed a project recently where the island of Jersey is installing fibre to every office and every home at 1 gigabit per second, that is 1,000 megabits both ways. It's cheaper than copper, and it's there to enable a new economy because they have a monoculture of banking and they need to change the economy of the island. And that has got to be founded on the ability to communicate globally. Now, they've already done all of the offices, so every company's got access to 1,000 megs, and they're now rolling out to the homes. So I would like to position my afternoon with you along the following lines, starting from the point of an ambition to give people 2 megabits per second is like giving our population a Morse key. You might as well not bother. In Colombia recently, I was getting 100 megabits per second both ways from my hotel. In America, I regularly get between 50 and 100 megabits. If I go to Korea, China, Japan, I get above that level. For me, the starting point for this nation is 100 megabits per second. 20 to 50 megabits per second will not give us entry to cloud computing on which rests the next phase of industry, commerce, and the generation of GDP. So from a professional point of view, I'm quite relaxed. I have no axe to grind. I have no vested interest. But as a citizen of this country, I really am quite worried as I watch the positioning of this nation on the back foot. To give you some perspective, when it comes to fibre to the home, this nation is number 36 in the World League. When it comes to broadband in the EU, we are number 25. If we look at the UK on a global grid, we're number 33 in terms of broadband provision. That does not bode well for our population and our ability to compete in world markets. It really does not. When people use superfast about broadband in the UK, I have to smile. It is neither super nor is it fast. For one aspect of this, it's asymmetric. The world is not an asymmetric place. If we are going to communicate, it tends to be rather symmetrical. And if we are going to stop driving vehicles and travelling an awful lot and flying in aeroplanes, then video conferencing is an obvious technology, which we can't access because we don't have a symmetrical service. And that's just one aspect. There are many others. And I would like to see us with a programme that actually brings us up to a world standard in a reasonable time. And I have some formulas and some suggestions for doing just that, but it means changing the way we think about the problem and stepping outside of the shoes of a 200-year history that spanned telegraphy and telephony. We need to think differently.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
From what you just told us, it seems to me that you have no equivocation in saying that internet access at a high speed is a sine qua non of success in the modern world, and as such you would argue it was a strategic utility and an overriding economic requirement for the future well-being of this country. Is that correct?
Correct. Probably even more so than road and rail and air.
Right. Now, Gordon, you're... Yes, sorry.
Do you think there is some complacency about adopting that as that view within government?
I think there's a lack of understanding, and I think that there is a perception afoot that's come out of industry that is in the interest of certain industries, but not in the interest of the population at large. In my time in industry, I've seen a phenomenal change in everything from honesty to ethics to positioning. So I came into industry and it was clear cut. We were the servants of this society. Our job was to put in place products and services that actually satisfied the need of a developing nation. And now there seems to have been a swing of the pendulum away from that to, I'm here to benefit the company. I'm here for the benefit of the shareholders. And that loss of perspective of a duty to society, I think, is really quite damaging.
Lord Selborne.
You're very clear that superfast broadband is a strategic necessity.
Correct.
And Jersey, I think you said, was going to have a gigabit into business. Well, that seems to me to make sense. But what are you expecting the benefits to be of a household with that amount, unless they're running a business from it? What happens in societies where they do already have large access to superfast broadband, countries like Korea? Isn't it the case that certainly that's used for downloading films, very often illegally, but what other benefit is there for the household?
Well, let me come at this from this direction. Very often the view is put in this country, if everybody can't have something, then no one can have it. And if, for example, the company that produced this mobile phone had started with the, how do we make this for $5 so that everybody in the country can have it, they would have failed. All products, commercial products, start at the top end of society. They start at a high price, they're low volume. The amortization of R&D takes place at the cost of the people with money, the people who are the early adopters, and gradually the price comes down. We now have the situation, because of that effect, where there is no excuse for someone not being online, because the cost of a mobile phone and a laptop is so low that, believe me, everyone can afford one. They may have to buy a second-hand one, but even the new devices are quite low in cost. So what are people going to do in the home with this broadband? In the United States, for example, they are rapidly adopting IBM Watson technology in medicine. Let me break that down. IBM Watson started off as a challenge. Deep Blue took on the human race and won and became the chess champion. Watson took on all human players in a game show called Jeopardy. It wiped out the human race. It is now wiping out human MDs, doctors, on diagnosis by a good measure. And the reason is it is able to analyse and put in perspective all the case histories that are available to it, whereas most MDs, most doctors, and most specialists in any topic, including my own, are really struggling to read and keep up with the leading edge technology. So when I go to see my specialist, I go and see him with the latest research papers because I have a vested interest in staying alive. Now, he doesn't have the time to keep me alive. I have to look after myself. So let's run a scenario where you are ill. The doctor comes to visit you. Unfortunately, you don't have broadband, so he can't access the database. Now you are depleted of the very finest care because the artificial intelligence is not there to help you. If you move on from the entertainment and you say, what is going to happen in education for our children? The model of education we have right now is vested in an old industrial revolution, which was about getting a population of people to be able to read and write and know a little bit about geography pertinent to producing goods that we would ship worldwide. Nothing has changed. But education has to change because we're moving from a world of stovepipes where we have physics and chemistry and biology and technology and engineering and history to one where there is science. So the interdisciplinary nature now of industry means that we have to change the way we educate our people. Now, we're not going to do this in the future in the ways that we've done with a sage on the stage and a whiteboard. We're going to have to do it much more on an individual basis. And to do that, children will need access at speed to a machine that will help them learn and understand. On top of that, you have to recognise that understanding a lot of complex things is now also beyond the world of mathematics that you and I enjoyed. It's into computer simulation. If you can't get through on a broadband link to the computing power to allow you to do that simulation, then education is going to suffer. On the media side, you have to think in terms of television and radio being moribund. The notion that you will sit down with an actual timetable and watch and listen to programs at the behest of the broadcasters is a nonsense. And people are now time-shifting all of this content to when they can. But there is an absolute desire to participate. So I think I see the world moving from passive consumption to active participation. If we look at industry, after World War II, and I was born in 1946, at 11 years old I got into electronics and would drive my parents mad by doing electronics on the kitchen table. We now have a new genre, and they're doing bioengineering on the kitchen table. And these are young people who are opting out of our universities because they're so dull and they're not getting the leadership and it's not adventurous enough. And you can buy for $5 known genetic strings of material, and they are doing experiments at that level. And the only thing that worries me about this is whatever are they flushing down the sink. But it turns out that things of that nature, including, dare I say, 3D printers, are giving rise to new industrial models. And these are not the mighty workshops that we're used to today. They're dispersed. So I know it's a far stretch right now, but you have to think in terms of shipping designs and shipping solutions instead of shipping product. That's the world we're gearing up to. So I don't want to engineer for today. I want to engineer for tomorrow with a sight on the future, because there's a huge cost in getting this wrong. If we go fibre halfway, we will have to upgrade at some point. And if we put 20 megabits per second in, we'll be re-engineering it within a couple of years.
Because there's a high cost in engineering this too, isn't there?
I mean, I suspect I know the answer from your concluding sentence, but what sort of infrastructure would you put in place to deliver?
Well, I have no religious conviction here. I worked on optical fibre. I was responsible for the team that put the first fibre across the Atlantic. And it was a terrific technology. But the reality is you can't always get fibre in. Now, the mainstay of a future network has to be fibre. And there will no doubt be some places where we will have to use a wireless drop to reach people. Let me give you a slightly oblique view. People are getting very excited about 4G. How do you feel about at least 4 or 5 times more towers around the countryside to service the nation with that technology? It makes no sense, because this is what we're doing on the island of Jersey. When we put fibre into the home, the box that we put in the home has 3G in it and will be upgraded to 4G. So now we've got automatic infill of the network. And when we get a room like this, when we all suddenly want bandwidth, it can be serviced from a box in the corner as opposed to a mast a kilometre away. So the only way that we can engineer a network that allows for the clustering of people and things is to put bandwidth out there on the end of fibre.
Right. But is it fibre to the cabinet or fibre to the home?
Fibre to the cabinet is one of the biggest mistakes humanity has made. It ties a knot in the cable in terms of bandwidth,
right,
and it imposes huge unreliability risks. And once the local bandits have recognised that there's a car battery in the bottom, you can bet your bottom dollar that a crowbar will be out and the battery will keep disappearing.
Right.
So it is a bit of a shame, but I understand why people have made that decision, and they've made it worldwide, by the way.
Yeah.
But
I imagine cost plays a large part. I mean,
of course.
My understanding is it's about a quarter or a fifth of the cost of fibre at home.
Yeah. But let me give you an alternate view. Yeah. I live out in the country. We have 420 households, and I am trying to get a fibre into the village. And all I'm asking a company to do is put a fibre into the middle of the village and walk away. And this is why I know it's going to work, because on the island of Jersey we have taken housing developments where there is an underground or on-surface garage with 6 or 12 apartments above. We put a box with a fibre into the basement. We open up the Wi-Fi and 3G. We leave all the Cat5 sockets, the RG45s open, go away, come back a month later, and the apartment block is wired up. What a miracle. Think about it. You buy a washing machine, you buy a television, a hi-fi, a computer, you install it yourself. So what's the magic about this fibre to the home? Answer, none. You can put copper cable, Cat5, LAN cable if you will, in yourself. If you can't, there'll be a...
Are you allowed to? Forgive me. Are you allowed to by BT?
I always take the view in everything that I will beg forgiveness later. And it is, in my previous home, I worked for BT,
yes,
and I asked them to put fibre to my home and they wouldn't, but I arranged for a drum of cable to be dropped off one night, and my sons and I pulled the cable in ourselves using my car instead of a winch. Some friends spliced it in, and I had 8 fibres into my home. Now that's an alternate model. Just a month ago, I was in Munich, and I was giving the opening address to the Fibre to the Home conference, and I stood and watched in amazement a gentleman from 3M jointing single mode optical fibre with snap connectors in less than 2 minutes. Now, the last time I did that in a laboratory, it was taking half an hour. It was a precision job. But I looked at that and thought, I think I could find geeks in just about every housing development in every village in the land who would take about an hour to train doing that, and then they would do it. In my community, I have a farmer with a plough and a JCB. He's happy to cut me a trench. But when I go to BT, they say we need £140,000 to put the fibre in, and you can bet your bottom dollar that that's £130,000 for the trench, but they won't accept my trench. I'm looking for a company with the imagination to say, dig me a hole, I'll put it in, you cover it up, and we'll take it from there.
But so that I'm absolutely clear, you would go for fibre to the home?
Yes, wherever possible, without a shadow of a doubt.
I mean, at the moment we've got a lot of copper,
yes,
at which BT possibly wish to recoup their investment in. Is there any future for copper in even the medium term?
Yeah. Well, let me give you an interesting statistic, because even when I was in the company, 85% of all homes in the UK were within 1 kilometre of a BT fibre that was dark. It wasn't being used. From my home to the nearest fibre is 500 metres to the east and 500 metres to the west, and I can get access to neither. The easterly fibre belongs to the railway, and the westerly fibre belongs to BT.
Right.
So the whole village is surrounded by fibre. We're not allowed to drink.
Is the point you're making then that across the UK there is considerable amount of fibre that is either dark or is used in private networks that could, and you would argue perhaps should, be deployed more generally with other people tapping into it?
Correct. I have a line that I've tried on Ofcom from time to time, and it goes like this. If they are powerful enough to regulate the air we breathe, and I mean the radio spectrum, surely they're powerful enough to regulate the wavelengths on the optical fibre. A single fibre can carry all the conversations of humanity at the same time, twice over. I mean, it's an immense amount of bandwidth. Their ability to carry data is a lot less, of course, but there is quite a lot of space on the fibres that are there in the ground now that could be accessed. So as we go along liberating and unbundling the duct network, there is a case, I think, for unbundling optical fibre and unbundling the wavelengths.
Now, Lord Selborne's. Sorry.
Well, it's clear that you would wish to see every household connected to optical fibre, and that the cost at the moment, if you get a quote from, as I would, as I live like you, in a remote rural community, the cost is fairly staggering from the operators to install it. What is the cost, do you think, of the cost of the cable itself if I was to buy the cable?
The cable is trivial. The fibre costs pence. The plastic that goes around it costs pence. It's a very low cost. The fantastic costings that you get are entirely civil engineering. Always it's a civil engineering.
So I've got a JCB, so that's not a problem.
Yes.
Now then, what problem am I going to have in getting somebody to accept that work? They're not, are they? There is going to be.
Well, I know in BT's case, it's not in their business model to do that. So before they can do it, they have to modify their business model. However, I was with a company this morning, and they are coming to have a look. Right now, for my village, I have 2 contenders who want to come in with wireless into the village from the church tower, and I have 1 contender who wants to bring an optical fibre into the village. My solution to my particular village is that there are quite a lot of houses side by side. That makes it relatively easy to dig a trench right across the gardens if people want to join. And the get out, if you like, is to have small antennas on the church tower to beam into people's homes. I can get about 100 megabits to people's homes within reasonable range doing that.
What should government do to break what appears to be something of a cartel which allows these massive costs to be foisted on the consumer?
My recommendation would be to put some money into an investment called the new players. The 560 million that is being talked about, I have to tell you, is petty cash in this game, because getting the country up to fibre to the home for everyone, we're probably talking something of the range 10 to 15 billion. Now, if we want to leverage for the nation the best we can out of that 560 million, I would invest it in the small players so that there is a third force. In all successful commercial markets, there is a rule of 3, possibly 4. What we have right now is a rule of 2. We don't have enough competition, and we need more competition in the market. If we were to bring in new players with new business models, with the flexibility to come to you and I and say, you dig the trench and we'll provide the terminal equipment and the fibre, that would transform it. It would also change the attitude and the approach of the incumbents. And that's what it's going to take. Why would you change? You control the market.
I don't think I'm digressing, but it's if these new players, and particularly the one of the two that you were talking about,
yes.
You dig the trench, they lay the fibre, aren't they still going to have the issue about connecting to the BT fibre? How do you regulate that? You're saying that's what Ofcom should be specifying and so on.
I think in a lot of cases that is the problem. And the charges are entirely commercial, and I mean for business. And there's no breakout of the charges for domestic use or even SME use, and it becomes prohibitive. But there are cases where a number of companies have actually got their own fibre. So I think it will need the will of government and probably a change in regulation and operating licences to make sure that that national investment in fibre, which, by the way, has been amortised this past 20 years, should be accessible to other players. We need a little bit more of a level playing field. The worst thing that I see is start-up companies who get into this space to service people like you and I, who are then observed making a success and are then wiped out purposely by the incumbents. I don't think that's a healthy market. It's unbalanced. We need 3 strong players, and probably we need 1 or 2 boutique players. That's the sort of market mix you usually get.
You make a point there about small companies growing and then being wiped out.
Yes.
Do you have any evidence on that for us? I mean, I can see it's difficult, and I'm not pressing on it, but I mean...
The answer is yes. Here's what actually happened. So if you have a look at Cambridge, for example, there have been several startup companies, Cambridge Wireless, who set up purposely to serve the villagers in Cambridge. So the inhabitants went to incumbents and said, we'd like broadband, and were told it was not cost effective. Cambridge Wireless went out there to put in wireless broadband, and as soon as they went out to the households, there was an announcement by the incumbent, we're coming. And once that happens, people say, oh, we'll wait for the incumbent then. And then the market is taken away. You don't need too much of that to destroy a small startup.
When did this happen?
This has happened within the last 5 years.
Right.
Okay. So it's repeated behaviour.
Fine, thank you. Sorry. Can we... Lord St. John.
No, you mentioned in your opening remarks about the UK falling woefully short of the world standard for super-fast broadband. Could you really define that world standard? And what criteria would we need to satisfy in order to have the best super-fast broadband in Europe? You mentioned, I think, that we were 25th in Europe.
Yes. If we said, what are the leaders doing, say Sweden, in Greater Europe, and in the Far East, we have Korea and Japan and China, they have a minimum level of 100 megabits per second. That's where they start. They're rolling out 1 gig, but they're planning for the next phase of 10. Now, to come to an earlier point, if you've got fibre to the cabinet and you're relying on copper, I can tell you but the network is going to collapse on copper when you get to 1 gig. It'll collapse much earlier. You may do 200 or 300 megs over a short distance, but you're not going to do anything like a reasonable reach at 1 gig, and certainly you're not going anywhere at 10. So you've immediately got this knot in the bandwidth. And the only question is, how fast will this occur? And that is almost entirely down to the rate of industrialization and growth. A lot of people see Japan something of an economic basket case in Southeast Asia. I do not. I think it's been a roaring success. I think they've done rather well at fending off the Chinese, and they've held on to the high-tech ground. And compared to the Western economies, they've done quite well. What they're investing in are the next round of supercomputers, the next round of robotics, the next round of industries that are going to be based on nano and biotechnology. So for me, I sometimes have this dream, if I could go back to being 20 years old, where would I go? What would I target as an industry? And it would be at the cusp of nano, bio, ITC, and artificial intelligence. That's where the action is in this coming 50 years. And that is a very, very much a bandwidth-hungry sector. Now, if we don't invest in those areas, we are going to lose out significantly.
In the case of these Southeast Asian countries, where did they get the money from in order to actually do what you described?
Well, there are several models, and one of them is, of course, government intervention. Another one is much lighter taxation. They see fibre to the home or bandwidth rollout as much as an infrastructure as water, sewage, electricity, gas, road, rail, air. It's a necessary infrastructure, and if you haven't got it, then your economy suffers. In the same way that the British economy suffers because of the road network, they see the next phase being heavily dependent on bits, transported bits, period.
Because in that same context, we were saying that the amount that the government set aside, 530 million or 560 million, is petty cash.
Correct. There's zero missing off the end.
Are you then suggesting tax breaks to smaller operators who can fill that third sector that you're talking about?
Here is the problem. I work in the startup sector, and I work in the startup sector here and in the United States. And it's quite upsetting, because if you go for funding in the UK, people start talking 50k, 100k, possibly $1 million. And you go to the United States, and they start with 10 million, 100, 200 million. Now, ask this question. What contribution has Europe made to the internet technology? What revolutionary technology and industry came out of the internet for Europe? There is only one. It was Skype, and that was bought by the Americans. All of the innovative technologies in the internet came out of the United States. We don't have an Intel, we don't have an Apple, we don't have a Microsoft, we don't have a Cisco. We don't have anything remotely close to those industries. Why? We've spent an awful lot of money in R&D in Europe, mainly funding academic exercises. They've not resulted in big industry. Where we're really good in manufacturing is things like aerospace, pharmaceuticals. That's where we have scored. But there is nothing coming out of Europe that will excite you about the internet. That's not where the innovation is. And partly that is due to the fact that you cannot get funding, period. So I listen to government ministers and I watch the market, and I watch people trying to change the funding regime, but it's extremely difficult to get funding for anything innovative in Europe. If you fail in the United States, someone will immediately ring you up and offer you a job. You must have learned something. In the UK, if you fail, you will not be given a job. If you fail in Europe, It's a real black mark, a social disgrace. If you fail in Southeast Asia, loss of face would probably mean you'll commit suicide. Those are the social inhibitors. In this country, we have got some super people, really good startup companies, but they can't get the money to succeed. If you're up against someone who is not as clever, smart as you are, but they've got 200 million and you've got one, guess who's going to win?
So, on the current model that we have in the United Kingdom, are you saying that the rollout of 4G is not viable?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last
On the current model, current strategy that we have for superfast broadband, you mentioned, Iran, about the 4G rollout.
Yes.
Are you saying that you don't think that that is going to be a viable rollout on the current strategy that we have at the moment?
What I'm saying is it won't do what it says on the tin.
That's what I'm saying.
Because one of the things that amuses me greatly is the up to 20 megabits per second. Up to 5,000 cornflakes in my box, but there are 3. It doesn't help. It's an absurd product description, and if anything needs deleting from the the English language, it's up to. We need. If 4G is rolled out, for sure, if you're close to the base station, you'll get bandwidth. The further away you go, you'll get less bandwidth, period. That's a function of physics. You can't beat that. And the only way to get a lot of bandwidth everywhere is to have more and more smaller cells. And that's really what the wireless future is about. To do that, you need more fibre.
Absolutely.
Period. Yep.
Right. Now, Lily Fuchs.
Dr. Cochrane, I was going to ask you if you thought the government could deliver their campaign and effort to have the best superfast broadband network in Europe. I get the impression from your previous answers that you don't think so on present policy.
Can I just interject a moment? I'm told we've got a division in 3 minutes, so don't think it's discourteous when the bell goes off.
No, there's not a chance.
And then we'll either finish or not within the 3 minutes.
Yes.
Not a chance.
Not a chance. So, if you had to give advice to the government, maybe you have given advice to the government, what 3 things, or what 1 thing even, would you say they should be doing?
I've got 3 things, funnily enough, on my list here.
Right. Could you fire away then?
I'll fire away. Pursue the unbundling of the duct network. The duct, yes. Sorry, DUCT.
Yep.
And unbundle the dark fibre and make capacity available. And then empower Ofcom to regulate the wavelengths on fibre as they do the frequencies in the radio spectrum. Those are the 3 things. Now, if I can have a 4th, please push some money towards the startup companies who have a new and refreshing business model that will allow us to do something in the rural areas as well as the cities. Because in the village where I live, the number of creative people is quite phenomenal, and the number of businesses that have failed is also quite phenomenal.
Can we temporarily retire and come back and listen to the rest?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
dealt with your points.
Well, he did it very crisply and nicely. But what you're really saying is that we are dealing with a monopoly, aren't we? Which has to be broken.
Yes, monopoly, cartel, but it's a protected market, yes.
Yes. What would be the best way of bringing about the 4 good things that you thought should be done? Does it need a lot of legislation? Can it be done by regulation? Would the forthcoming communications bill, as we understand there will be one, be a suitable vehicle?
I think yes to all of the above. I'm a great believer in the light hand of management. I never saw a bureaucracy problem solved by even more bureaucracy. What I would suggest is that it's government's role to present a playing field on which the players can play an even game and the nation can benefit.
It should be a facilitator.
Absolutely. If government's role is to be the guardians of the society, in my view, protect the citizens in every sense of the word. And so we need to have in place laws, regulation, and investment that brings about a levelling of the playing field so that the nation can get broadband at a reasonable speed. I'm also very much in favour of self-help. So being identifiably from BT can be quite alarming sometimes from my past, because everybody in my village knows I'm from BT, ergo I've suddenly had the finger pointed at me and said, well, why can't you fix it? So I'm suddenly the man in the chair for my village, and I'm doing everything that I can. What I'm interested in doing there, by the way, is creating a new model and then advertising that model as an exemplar to say, this is the way it can work. Let me give you an idea of a similar community in the United States. Occasionally, I go to a conference, a rather geeky conference in Woods Hole, which is on the east coast of the United States. Verizon said that it was not cost effective to put broadband into this small village. So the community started a company, raised 30 million, and put up broadband themselves. Every home in that village now has 100 megabits plus, and the Wi-Fi has to be left open so that everybody can use the Wi-Fi. So you can walk down the street and you just pick up a huge amount of bandwidth for free all over the village. Now, it has the advantage of a rather high-tech community because there's an Oceanographic Institute there, and they do have, I think it's 53 Nobel Prizes living there, whatever. And but it's an exemplar that says if citizens take, if you wish, the law into their own hands, form a company or corporation, things can change. And I am willing, where I live, to go that far if I can muster the support. I can't afford to do it on my own, but I am willing to chip in my time and some money to create a smaller model of that exemplar.
Sounds like a lucky village.
Well, I'm not the only one. Everywhere I go in this country, I find remarkable people living in the rural areas. And the farming community, but where I live, there are people who are world famous for restoring cars, vintage cars, yacht designers, sail designers, people who work for the BBC, out of the media. We even have an ex-government diplomat in the village. These are smart people, and I think it's up to them to lead the rest, if you like, and create and solve the problem.
Can you just pursue that a little bit, because it seems to me that you're not saying this should be government money. That's the sine qua non of this. It's if you open it up and you allow investment to take place. Obviously subject to that predatory competition point that I think you mentioned earlier. But if you do allow it to open up an investment, that could actually do the trick.
Yes, and what I'm interested in is there are two dangers, I think, with the government investment. It's either spread too thin and it has no effect, or it just impacts one place. And the trick is, I think, to do exactly what you said, to put in place a legal and regulatory situation whereby small startup companies who are willing to raise investment and move into this area stand a reasonable chance of survival. If they don't, investors will not put their money into the pot. So we need a situation where clearly these new companies stand a fighting chance of survival. And that's what I would like to see.
Could we move on, please, before we do that to the Bishop of Norwich? When you talked about the three measures, one of the ones that you recommended was dark fibre should be unbundled.
Yes.
Was also a shorthand way of saying, and obviously as well, active fibre network should equally be unbundled and people be given access to it?
Yes.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Yes, and while you were out on the division, we had a short discussion about the parallel situation with mobile. Because what happened in the UK with mobile was 5 mobile operators each put up 30,000 towers, 2 billion each operator, 10 billion spent, when they could have all shared the same tower. So the country could have spent 2 billion. The competition was not about towers and coverage, it was about services. And only now, as competition and costs are really biting, do we see the mobile operators actually coming together. So I'm interested, and always interested, in the way we leverage technology to the benefit of humanity, i.e. this society. And I think that parallels exactly what you said.
No.
Actually, before I get on to my main question, I'm very interested in your comment on towers. I mean, I've got about 648 of them in my diocese, and you mentioned in relation to your village. Do you think you've focused quite a lot on fibre, but in terms of wireless, doesn't that have an enormous capacity for meeting some of the challenges about which you've been talking, or is
the answer is yes, but it depends on a number of things. The geography and the density of the population. Something as simple as a wet tree in the direction in between you and the antenna can just wipe out the signal. So you have to remember that the laws of physics can't be got around, and the distance from the antenna is critical. Any obstructions in the way are quite critical, but you're quite right. We can do a lot with wireless, but if we are going to get 100 megabits plus, then the wireless is going to be relatively short distance. You're not going to be doing 100 megabits over 10 kilometres. You're really not.
Going back to some of the things that you've said earlier, you've really described what sounds like a combination of market failure and political failure. And I wonder whether you think that the political failure is more to do with a lack of understanding as to what the potential in relation to superfast broadband or superfast broadband is, and how is it that other countries have not experienced this same combination of market and political failure?
Let me relate to you a very sad story from my past. In 1986 I got fibre to the home. By 1990 BT with DuPont had built 2 factories, one in Ipswich and one in Birmingham. The Ipswich factory employed nearly 1,000 people manufacturing the components. The Birmingham factory was manufacturing the systems. We were rolling out fibre to the home as an active programme, but it was stopped by a little problem called the Thatcher government and Sir Keith Joseph. And they wanted the American cable companies in. The programme was stopped. Who was right behind us? Who were we working with? The Japanese and the Koreans. They looked on, aghast as we stopped, and they carried on. So they have had the benefit of a lead since about 1991, where they have rolled out fibre to the home, and we went backwards in time. So that is the political failure. This could also be a commercial and an engineering failure. And I'll tell you the reason why. Technologists have a wonderful habit of rolling out technology without telling society what it means. and what the implications are. And it's something that I've fought all my engineering life to try and explain to lay people the implications of a technology is very important. And to my mind, that particular failure was, one, catastrophic, two, it was partially political, but three, it was also an industrial failure, a failure to come to government and explain the implications and why that investment should not have been stopped. Now, it could be that bringing in more competition was the right thing to do, but it could have been done without forestalling the fibre rollout at that time. And that happens all the time, by the way.
Can I just go back to the point about
yes.
Was it called BT, the business that was stopped? Just in 1981, it was just again, so we can
yes, it was BT, and BT were into manufacturing because right up till that period, we had been manufacturing all the components for undersea cable systems. So we had an established manufacturing arm. And by the way, in its GPO past, it used to be called Factories Department, and it used to refurbish telephones and switching equipment and things like that. And what actually happened was Hewlett-Packard bought the Ipswich plant, and that was then dismantled and sold to Southeast Asia. And this was all the clean rooms and the fabrication equipment. And Fujitsu purchased the plant in Birmingham, and that is still an operational plant.
Fine.
Okay.
Thank you. We need to follow that one up. No, the bishop's gone. So I assume you must have answered his question.
I've either frightened him to death or he's happy with my answer.
Do you think it's a general proposition, therefore, that where there is fibre, there should be open access?
Yes.
And presumably the same basically will follow with mobile too, and satellite?
Yes.
So the key to it is open access to whatever infrastructural means of delivery.
Yes. One of the things I've engendered in Jersey is that the 3G that's built into everybody's home should be operator agnostic. So for the incumbent, Jersey Telecom, who are providing this 3G service, they can carry the competitors' mobile signals and make a little money out of that.
Mm-hmm. So it's a bit like the railways. Provided you buy a ticket, you can get on the train.
Yes, exactly right. But it's very difficult sometimes to convince people that this is a sensible argument, this is a sensible way to operate. In my past, when competition came into the BT, up against BT in the UK, I argued strongly for opening up the ducts, opening up the cables, and using our strategic resources, which were things like buildings, telephone exchanges, repeater stations, to house the equipment of the internet service providers and the competition, and provide them with power, because we had diesel generators and batteries and all the people. We could sell that as a service, but that was not seen as a good business plan.
The idea was to squeeze the other guys out rather than make a profit out of them.
Yes, that's the alternative.
Yeah.
But that doesn't play to the benefit of the nation, and to my mind, is not a very clever business model.
But then, if you have fibre cradling across the countryside in various ducts, is it difficult at a point where there isn't an access point to make an access point to tap into it?
If it's dark fibre, it's extremely simple. You and I could go and do it one afternoon with a penknife and a few bits and pieces, yes.
So in terms of your you speak for yourself, I'm pretty cat-handed, but
you'd be underguided.
But to go back to the point you were making about the self-help,
yes,
if you could get access to the nearest piece of fibre, whoever it happened to be owned by,
yes,
that obviously makes self-help much easier and more attractive, wouldn't it?
Correct, yes.
And if you've got either dark fibre or private intranet stuff quite nearby, if you could get in, would it transform it, or is it just at the margins?
No, it would be transformative. It would be absolutely transformative. And by the way, this is exactly the history of the cable TV industry in the United States, the telegraph industry way back, and the telephone system way back in the United Kingdom. In the United States, on the prairies, people couldn't get a television signal. It wasn't cost effective to build more transmitters, so the community banded together, put up a 300-foot tower, a huge antenna and an amplifier, and then wired up the community for what was called community antenna TV. That later became an industry called cable TV. In my mind, this self-help ultimately will become another industry, because believe me, the last thing any of us want to do is run a network. But once the network is established, I think then players would come in and say, we'll run it for you.
We'll manage it for you.
We'll manage it for you. Because the key thing is getting that network installed. That's where all the cost is. The running cost after that is relatively low. So if in the case of our communities, believe me, the farming community are wonderful. You mentioned that you need a trench and someone will turn up with a huge tractor and a plough and a JCB, and that will be that. It will be done.
My experience, they normally dig up the water main at the same time.
Well, they certainly do in the towns. In the villages, they tend to be a bit more careful. But the sort of problems that a large corporation would have in doing this is there are always wayleave problems and that sort of thing. And yet, there are vested interests here that the landowners want broadband. And the condition is, if you want broadband, you've got to let us put a trench across your property.
Is there other potential difficulties with calculating and the costs of carriage in respect of the inputted cable, or the inputted wireless network, whatever? Because you've got to somehow or other you've got to agree a price, and if you can't agree a price, you need a regulator to set it.
A long, long time ago, I came to the conclusion, and by and large it's true, that the delivery of bandwidth is independent of both the bandwidth and the distance. It's the reason why your telephone call to North America is worth relatively nothing. It's just the sheer quantity of calls that makes that a viable business. Let me give you a couple of figures that pop into my mind. When I came into this business with the old analog cables across the Atlantic that used thermionic tubes, valves, a system would be put in, it would cost about 300 million across the Atlantic, and it would take something of the order of 5 to 7 years to pay back. When the first optical system was put in, it was filled inside about 6 months, and it had paid back in less than 18 months. Today, those systems cost 350 million, and they pay the installation cost, the actual cost of the project, pays in a matter of months, not a matter of years. So the money to be made in that provision is huge. So in terms of talking about thousands of circuits across the Atlantic, we're now talking about 2.5 million speech circuits across the Atlantic, because the majority communicator on this planet now is not humankind, it's machines.
Mm-hmm.
So
if that analysis is basically correct, why is it people who have either dark cable or exclusively used cable aren't falling over themselves to encourage other people to tap in?
Because they're hanging on for grim death to old thinking and an old business model, period. They have to think again. My analogy would be something like the old steel industry against the new steel industry. If you bought all this old infrastructure and you've got thousands of people running it, it's very difficult for you to say, well, actually, we've got to get rid of all that. Elaine, again, let me just recall some numbers. When I was in BT, there were 7,600 telephone exchanges, small buildings in villages all over the land. We came to the conclusion that with optical fibre, because of the greater reach than copper, we could get down well below 100, something like 60 billions, period. Now, 60 buildings versus 7,600 is an awful lot of reduction. There was also the possibility of going down from 10,000 or more man-in-van crews down to less than 1,000 man-in-van crews, because the thing that happens with copper is water ingress. The number one fault problem is water ingress. Fibre doesn't care about water. There's not a lot you can do about the JCB driver who hooks a cable and whips it up, but that is the minimal case. So the fault level in an optical network absolutely goes down very, very low. You can reduce manning, buildings, power consumption, everything.
When you speak about trenches, forgive me, I'm not really familiar with trenches. What depth are you going down to, and what's the size of the trench into which all this is laid?
Well, the trick in digging a trench is not how much earth you take out, it's how much earth you don't take out. So let me give you a couple of examples. In Scotland and Wales, for example, there are rock saws where the trench is about that wide, and this is done in Sweden, so the trench is about that wide and about that deep. The cable is put in, and then they put cement and backfill, so you just get a line in the rock. Where I live, in a sandy location, the cables are typically a metre, possibly 2 metres down, depending on what other services are there. You have to imagine in 3D that services are layered,
yes,
and you try to avoid things like power cables, for example. So if it was a trunk cable between London and Birmingham, the answer to your question is it's about 3 metres deep. The duct is taller than me and about that wide, and it's got a lot of holes in it, and it's earthenware all the way. It's set in reinforced concrete and covered in shale and sand, and occasionally a JCB digger will hit it and keep going. Okay, despite all the indications that there's something valuable there. So it depends. The big infrastructure between major cities is buried very deep. It's a lot closer to the surface when you go between town and village, and when you get to your home, it can be a foot, 2 feet down, depending on the terrain.
Thank you.
Okay.
I would just end, as we're getting to the end of the session, just ask you, first of all, is there anywhere you think it is particularly beneficial for us to have a look at around the globe? You've got very wide global experience in these matters. If I say to you now, if you are interested in the topic we're talking about, where should we look to see what you think is as good an example as there is?
Well, I think you should go to Scandinavia, because there are a lot of self-help examples there. I think if you went to Southeast Asia, you would both be surprised and shocked. Germany is another good example.
When you say surprised and shocked, can you just elaborate?
Well, it goes like this. The engineering is neither elegant nor particularly secure. I always describe it to students as if there is a tree or anything standing vertical, they just nail the cable to it and continue. It's extremely crude, but very, very low cost. So if you go to the United States, one of the things that immediately strikes you is the amount of cable that's in the air. This country is wonderfully clean by comparison. Any town, any village, relatively speaking, is free of cable in the air. In the United States, major cities have huge cables dragged on poles right into the centre, which is always a bit of a shock. The Japanese do the same thing. I believe that the Germans are much more tidy-minded, as are the Scandinavians. The Germans have an incredible social pride about their towns, and they don't have them cluttered. They engineer well. A lot of people would say they engineer to the extreme. Another place is Singapore, which is also engineered well. So on my list would be a few extremes, and I think Japan, Korea are at one end, and
Baltic states?
there are a few places there, yes, yes. But from an engineering point of view, the costs, roughly speaking, if you dig a trench and it's a tall, hard work, like you're cutting through tarmac or concrete or any kind of stones inclusions, you're at about £80 or thereabouts a metre. If you're in sand, you can get down to about 15 or £10 per metre. It's of that order. So if you say it's 100 metres to your home, you're talking top side of 1,000 just for the home. So that is the order of the problem. However, very often you're not coming to one property, you can fan out to several. And if you can get to one place, you can get to several others and share that cost.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's interesting. And finally, really, what if you were in charge of writing a national superfast broadband strategy? What would be its core principle?
The core principles would be founded on access for all companies and all people at a rate of 100 megabits and above, with a weather eye on fair competition, an economic framework and a regulatory framework that encourage people to help themselves and encourage start-up companies to provide the competition that's necessary.
Fine, thank you. And if you're starting today, when do you think it would be realistic to suppose you might have managed to have achieved what you've just described?
If we put everything in place, you have to be thinking in terms of a 10-year programme. It's got to be of that order. One of the most significant difficulties now is the lack of physical skills. Getting enough people to actually go out there and do this is a problem for the established industry, let alone the new. So part of this has to be training up people with sufficient dexterity and technical skills to do this work. But I do think those people are there.
Fine.
It's a question of identifying them and getting on with the job.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And unless there's anything more you wish to say to us.
Well, I wish you luck in your endeavour, and I look forward to reading your report. And should you require any more information or any help, if you can't find it on my homepage, which is cochrane.org.uk, then just email me or call, and I will help you all I can.
Well, you've been very generous. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.